Stop. Oh goodness, you're silly. Why?
On my phone, on my desk. With the green paper, so that's why I look green. So it doesn't always be out now.
Hello. Hi,
Hi.
Kristen. Can you hear me?
I can
Yes,
hear
we
you.
can.
Okay. Gonna make it louder.
Where do you come from? Oh.
She just hears ghosts in the background. She can't see you guys. You know that, right?
Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
Hi.
Hi. My name's Mark. How are you?
Hi, I'm Suzanne.
Hi, Suzanne.
I need to lie. Let's see here. Okay, it's better now. I can hear now. There we go. Where's everybody, Kristen?
They're hiding from you.
Oh, there they are. Hello.
Come sit here so they can see.
Yeah.
Let's review his questions. I'm still yours.
Yeah.
Ethan family. Who knows what they're doing up there half the time. Mhm. Go ahead. Yeah, when time starts. When we start our meeting, yes. Oh, well, that's true. That's because Lizzie set it up. I don't know how it works. Lizzie set it up for me. You don't want to have notifications halfway through the meeting? No.
What?
Notifications.
I get all kinds of.
Oh, you're crazy. All right. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our true crime book club discussion. And I just
Hello.
want to say thank you to our authors for coming to Zoom with us today. We're discussing The Babysitter, My Summers with a Serial Killer by Liza Rodman and Jennifer Jordan. I know a few of us have already discussed some things on it, but we can go back if there's anything that we want to talk more about for our new visitors. But I think the most pressing question that we all discussed last time was how we weren't aware of this fact, even though we all, come from this area. So if anyone has any comments on that, if they did know about it or, what they've learned from this book that they want to share, I figured that was a good place to start off.
I don't remember it at all. Do you remember neither, right?
No, not at all.
Well, that's because we're in Wisconsin, so.
I can't hear them.
Yeah, you guys are too far away. You can't be heard in the microphone. You know that, right?
We said we were ensconced in Western's bubble.
There we go. There we
There we
go.
go.
That better?
Yeah, you were too far away. Couldn't hear you.
That was part of the plan.
That's always part of the plan.
No,
I
I
have
was
a
shocked because I followed a lot of various true crimes over the years, and I was not aware of this at all until I read the book, I don't know, a year, maybe 2 years ago.
A lot of people
Hello.
said,
Hello.
there she is.
Hi.
Everybody's just saying that nobody was aware of this case, Jen. Until
Well,
they
yeah,
read the
I
book.
know, I know. I mean, unless you lived on Cape Cod,
Yeah.
nobody knew about it.
But where he was caught is very close to where we live. He was caught in
Really?
Dedham, Mass.
Yeah.
That's literally the next town over from us,
Yeah.
you know?
Mhm.
So to have a serial killer from Cape Cod, you know, be found in Dedham was pretty cool.
Was he found in Dedham?
Yeah, I guess he was working on a construction site in
He
Dedham.
was. Mhm.
Yeah.
That's where he murdered which victim was it, honey? Is like his second or third victim was murdered in Dedham.
Well, we think Susan
Yeah.
Susan,
Yeah.
that's right. Yeah.
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 at his apartment in Dedham.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think they arrested him in downtown first. They arrested him in Boston. They arraigned him in Provincetown.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow, unbelievable. I have a question for you, though. When
Oops.
Tony would take you to the secret garden,
Mm,
did you have any type of uneasy feeling?
Mostly
Did you
no.
think, you know, I know you were a child and you were young, but like, you know, just that
Well,
he would take,
mostly other than being physically uncomfortable because it was hot as hell in there.
okay,
No, I mean,
No.
you know, that was one of the things about writing the book was it was difficult for me. And part of the reason Jen and I worked so well together was she was like, well, he was a serial killer. And Jen and I have been friends for 45 years.
yeah,
Oh, wow.
So it was good to have her say, I know he was, you know, an adored babysitter, but he also was this.
right, right,
And it really, as we went through the writing process, there was more and more of that. I still haven't come to grips with that, actually.
mm-hmm,
And that's
Not all
what
the way. I don't think I ever will.
that's
right,
what
of course
set up
not.
a wonderful dichotomy in the book, in that Liza was more afraid of her mother than she was of a serial killer babysitter.
Right.
And all of the creepy vibes that he was putting out and that other people were picking up on, including his wife, Liza, you know, at a young age, looking at this, you know, cool, you know, would-be cousin, was just kind of, you know, blind to it all. That
And you know-
said, I think that some of her nightmares were triggered by a tamped down memory that
Mhm.
that she's not cognitively aware of, but that, you know, for that dream to come out of nowhere the way it does in that first
Mhm.
chapter of the book. You know, in my thinking this through as a forensic journalist and as, you know, somebody who had, you know, had to recreate to write the book, it's like, wait a minute, you know, how many years later to have that dream just like boop and
Yeah.
terrorize her, you know, to the degree that it did. I think she saw something that as a child, she was like, ooh, I don't know what that was, but I don't like it.
What I took from it, now this is your story, is that your mom wasn't giving you the attention at that time in your life, and he was giving you attention that made you feel good.
I think that's true. I think any adult at that age
Right.
who turns in your direction,
Hmm.
especially then in the 60s when, you know, it just wasn't, you were lucky if you got your food and that was it.
Right, right. Yeah.
You know, so and that's why I always say in these discussions, it's really important to put the book in context.
Hmm.
And that is the way it was. I mean, it wasn't unusual. My mother's best friend owned the hotel across the street,
Hmm.
and she was doing the same thing. And although not to the extent of my mother, she was not the same personality as my mother. She was a warm person.
Hmm.
But although when I wrote the book, there were other kids with me other than my sister at
Mhm.
certain times during those years. I took them out for privacy reasons.
Mhm.
But I interviewed them all for the book, and they all said the same thing. Nobody picked it. We couldn't wait to get in that truck. We could not wait.
Well,
Mhm.
definitely, we have no reason not to trust him,
Right,
you know,
right.
especially,
Plus it was ice cream.
yeah.
Plus it was ice cream. Plus it was ice cream and open windows and you know, the association and the music of the time. And also I knew his mother and she was incredibly kind to
What did
all.
you just touched on something about the mother. Do you think the mother had any idea that her son was not quite right?
Yes,
Okay.
but I don't think she knew what she was looking at. I don't think she had any idea, but she knew, she had to have known.
Yeah.
She had to have known something was off. But as you know, I think there are a lot of us who will look the other way
Mhm.
until we can't anymore. I think that happens a lot. You know, you hear that now with some of these school shooters. The parents say, I had no idea.
Mhm.
Well, maybe.
But there are two things. I mean, Cecilia, when she was asked, said, well, all I know is if my Tony did this, he must have had a good reason. That's number one. Because that's not a mother's, you know, normal reaction to hearing that your son might be a serial killer. And the other thing was that Tony, in his book that he wrote in prison, he described the murder of Susan. He blamed it on somebody else, of course, but he described the murder and it was brutal and it was in a bathtub. And in his telling of the story, you know, a mother, the killer's mother, came in and yelled at him for making such a mess. Now that makes sense on a lot. That makes sense in a lot of levels because she was a chambermaid.
Mhm.
So walking into, you know, being kind of maybe mentally not all there herself, walking into a horrific scene in a bathroom that her son was holding the knife. And as I say, I'm taking this from what Tony wrote in his, you know, factual novel, as he called it.
Right.
And
we don't know how true it is.
we don't know how true it is, but just it's such an odd thing. It's such an odd scene to create out of nowhere. Like the mother walks in and yells at the killer for making a mess, and then
Something happened.
Yeah,
Something definitely happened.
Yeah.
and we also know that Susan, where she was buried in the woods, was the closest one to the road. And she was in more pieces than any of the other ones. All of the other four walked into their deaths.
I think too, Jen, they didn't even have a word for what Tony was in 1968.
Right.
There's no word
Yeah.
for it. So
Yeah.
I really don't think she knew what she was looking at.
Mhm.
Although I know she had to have known something was up with him. She had to have.
Well, I'm sure his wife knew too. Young girl that she was, 13-year-old girl.
Yeah.
know.
Well, she certainly knew that his behavior was strange,
Right.
but she often writes even now that she wishes she had known what she was looking at.
Mm.
And again, context is so important, right? Although I've come to a different understanding since I wrote this book, because there's been, you know, the movie just came out about the Boston Strangler,
Yes. Yeah.
and they, you know, everyone here, I remember the Boston Strangler stuff.
Mhm.
So we all remember that. It was so horrific. And we'd just come off of that when Tony Costa hit the streets. So they had to, it's not like they'd never seen it before. You know, I'd given them a lot of, particularly my mother and my aunt, I'd kind of given them a pass, saying they didn't know what they were looking at. And so, but for them, for it never to come up, and I was 42 or 35 or however old I was when I found out. And they were like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, I know he became a serial killer. Well, who says that? So there
Mhm.
was some, I think, effort to not mention it. Maybe we better not mention this. And in the book, not in the book, is that there was some, my mother had some involvement with DSS. She kept it a secret till her dying day, but there was one little slip up that she mentioned one day. So I know she had some kind of interaction with DSS.
Or
Hmm. That's
Pardon?
interesting.
Or 20, yeah, or 20.
That's interesting. Hmm.
I
Wow.
hope you guys have tons of questions.
Paul, go.
Well, one of the parts that I found most fascinating was that you guys went back and were able to track down a lot of the suspected victims. Can you just talk about that a little bit? I thought, I was shocked that nobody tried before that to track the people down.
I know, it was one of those things where I got to the point of writing the sentence the way everybody else had throughout history, and she was never seen alive again. And as a journalist, I thought, well, I can't write that sentence because I don't know it to be true. So either I have to, we'll dig and we'll dig and we'll dig and won't find anything, and we'll say, to the best of anyone's knowledge, she was never seen alive again. So started digging, and unlike 50 years ago, had a lot more search engines at our
Obviously, yeah.
disposal, and did a lot of cross-referencing, spent 2 or 3 solid days at my desk with Facebook and Truth Finder and high school yearbooks and phone books, and just writing down a
Yeah,
list.
before that ever started, Jenny, we were at the library looking for them. We were everywhere looking for them. And then you did the deep dive.
Right. And then one by one found each of the 3 suspected victims of Tony, their families. They had since died, none of them at Tony's hand, but they had all since died. And found, just found them. And they were, to an individual, shocked that their sister, their mother, their aunt had been thought to have been the victim of a serial killer on Cape Cod. I mean, they had never heard it. And this is gets to the original comment made on this discussion this afternoon, that, this case wasn't really, it was known in New England, certainly, but it was not known nationally to the degree that people in California, where some of these families were, would say, what? My sister? No. So yeah, it was so gratifying. At one point I found the niece of one of the so-called victims. And no, I'm sorry, the daughter. And her mother had since died. And her mother was, drug addict and a vagrant, and they went from flop house to flop house. And as this woman told me, every time we had to leave in the middle of the night, we'd leave with a few less belongings. And by the end of it, when mother finally died, I had nothing from my childhood, nothing, not one picture. She said to me, I don't know what I looked like as a baby. I don't know what my mother looked like as a young woman. And I said, well, guess what? I found your aunt, her sister, before I found you. So let me in real time send you those pictures.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
She
cool.
just broke down and said, oh my God, my daughter looks just like I did. And my mother was so beautiful before the alcohol and the drugs took their toll. And so it was just, we both cried. I mean, it's just a wonderful moment for her to really have closure
Yeah.
for the first time.
From the strangest place, right?
Right.
Strangest place.
Do you think that there's any more victims when he traveled cross country a couple of times, and at that time period, people would hitchhike and they'd leave and go to California, whatever. Do you think that there may have been other victims that he may have killed on his way to California that were never heard of again by their families?
Oh, yeah.
We
Yeah.
think so.
There's
Yeah.
there's a double murder in Philadelphia, outside Philadelphia, that has never been solved. And it was done with a 2022, the same kind of gun
Mm-hmm.
Tony killed his victims with. And it was June of 1968, I think it was, the Stiver murders. They're called the Stiver murders. But I reached out to the state police in Pennsylvania and got nowhere. So Who
Yeah,
knows?
every police department we contacted said, oh, no, we don't have those records,
Yeah,
either
that's the
they
other
burned
thing.
down or it was before, digitizing records, and they purged everything after, 20, 30 years. And there
Mhm.
were also some, two bodies that were left in a trunk at Logan Airport. There were 4,000 missing girls and young women in that time frame,
Wow.
many of whom have never been accounted for. A lot showed up or, dead or alive, but there are still a few. And
Yeah.
especially out here in the West, where everywhere there's a new building going up, they find graves.
Wow.
Either the Mexican Indian Wars or the Pilgrims or the pioneers heading west, anyway. So yeah, I mean, I doubt that Tony, I shouldn't say it that way. I should say that there's every possibility that there are more than his 5 victims.
Mhm.
And when we applied for a permit to go in to where the burial site is, we applied to the National Seashore or the National Park Service.
Park Service,
And
yeah.
were denied. And the
Really?
reason we were denied, and this will give you an idea of what it was like to write this book, was because, and I quote, the family, this is an old case, and the family does not want it unearthed, to use a phrase. So that family is well connected down there.
And that family is Tony's family.
Right. So they kept us out. But we went in there anyway with our metal detectors, but found some shell casings and a couple of things, but nothing,
Mhm.
you need ground penetrating radar.
Right.
And
Wow.
we were denied a permit to do that.
And that we went in with a forensic scientist who, because he deals with this all the time, he didn't want to be the one to go against the National Park Service vis-a-vis the US government with ground penetrating radar. But at some point the permit's going to be granted.
Mhm.
And that said, I mean, there are a lot of other places to bury bodies than the Truro Woods. Off a fishing boat, done.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Yeah. Wow. That's amazing.
That was one of my thoughts at the beginning too, though, was, the ability that they had to search and probably a desire not to find too much more as well, to be honest with you, at the time, you wonder what else is there that nobody ever even looked at.
Right. Once they uncovered the bodies they were looking for, first they found 2 bodies they weren't looking for.
Oops, that's a problem.
And then they uncovered the bodies they were looking for. And once they did that, they stopped.
Right.
And they didn't, I think, want to be held accountable. And they didn't 50 years later, certainly want to be held accountable.
Yeah, and even 50 years ago, it was such a shit show of Keystone cops between the Provincetown Police, the Providence Police, and the Boston Police, all of whom were kind of, looking for the same things, but none of them communicating with each other. When Tony was located in Boston, they never even told P-Town or Providence.
Yeah.
And they let the car drive away with him in it.
They let
Yeah.
the car drive
Yeah.
away.
Wow.
Nuts.
I felt bad for the boyfriend of the 2 women from Rhode Island, though, that really, it was heart-wrenching that he tried so hard, saying that they would never do this, they wouldn't just disappear. And it, do you know whatever happened to him?
Yes, he married. In fact, I found his wife and daughter. The daughter lives here in Salt Lake, actually.
Oh, wow.
He married, and his wife told me that he never got over losing Patricia.
Yeah, for sure. Wow.
Especially in such a way,
Yeah.
Not get over that.
Yeah.
Probably the love of his life. And, the wife, the woman who eventually became his wife, was always felt like second fiddle, which is
Wow.
just continues the tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
It's not enough that this woman was murdered, but she had to, in dying the way she did, her boyfriend's life was forever altered. And then his life as a husband and father forever altered and tainted by the violent loss of his first love. Yeah. That's
the long arm of it, That's the long arm of it. I mean, even my kids are affected by this story. So, you know, it goes, it doesn't just stop with the telling.
Mhm.
Right.
Wow.
Anybody else?
I was just wondering if evidence is anything that's important.
If what?
Evidence?
What kind of evidence?
Well, I mean, you're talking about the shells that you were looking for, you found, stuff like that.
I'll tell you, in this case, and probably in a lot of other cases, we went looking for the evidence. Of course, we would do that. And we found it in pieces in an archive in Kent State University, and in the author who was then dead's garage at his ex-wife's house. Somebody made a deal with one of the cops, the state cops, in Barnstable. And all of the evidence that was supposed to be in the archives, including the trial transcript when I first reached out, had disappeared.
Hmm.
We looked for the gun, and mysteriously, oh, there was some evidence still in the DA's office in Bristol County. But I repeated requests for me to look in those boxes and no answer. I'm trying to think where else we found evidence. I think those are the three places. So by the time we got to it, the evidence in this case, as a matter of fact, the other day, I sent Jen a picture of some dentine gum that I found that was inside Pat Walsh's glove compartment in her Volkswagen. And
Wow.
it was in the archives in Kent State in a box with several other things, including the marker that we think he wrote the notes with. And she said, wait, is there blood on that dentine? You've been reading too many.
No, I think that's blood.
Looks like
mean,
it. I know, I know.
He kills, he goes back to the car, opens up, has a stick of gum.
Mm. I looked at it.
Driving away in his victim's car.
Gotta
I
get that
couldn't
taste
believe
out of
it
your
when I
mouth.
looked at it, Jen. I looked at it, I'm like, geez, that might be blood.
See?
Yeah. Wow.
See?
So, I mean, we found evidence everywhere, none of which would be admissible anymore because it's all been tainted. We found evidence, tons of evidence envelopes. I mean, it just was a shit show in plain English.
Mm.
So you
Wow.
couldn't really, even if you, I mean, I know there, someone told me that Tony's brother, who still lives down in Truro, thinks Tony got a bum deal. Tony didn't do it. Well, the killing stopped after Tony was arrested. So, I mean, that's as much evidence as you need. But
And when you drive away with the last two victims' car, that's a pretty good indication too.
I know, but people will believe what they're going to believe, right?
Right. And
Right.
Susan was last seen with Tony.
They were
And,
all last seen with Tony.
and Lindsay, last seen with Tony.
Mhm.
And
Christine.
Christine, last seen with Tony. So it's just, yeah, I mean, I'm sorry for Tony's brother, who's probably a little damaged himself, shall we say. So I'm sorry for that, but your brother was a serial killer, and that's
Mhm.
just fact.
Mhm.
Yep. Anybody else?
Where's Kristen?
Yeah, where is Kristen? I wanted
Kristen,
to
where are
see her.
you?
It's always good to match a face. with a
Yeah,
name.
Kristen.
Hello, Kristen.
Hello.
Now, you guys in Dedham, totally off subject, but you sound just like, I worked with a woman who lost her leg in the Boston Marathon bombing.
Yep.
Roseanne
I'm from
Scotia.
Boston. I'm from a place called Rosendale inside the city.
But you and she had like exactly the
Yeah.
same accent.
I have what they call a city accent. I have a Boston city accent.
And she grew up in Dedham.
Yeah. I grew up in the city though. I grew up in Boston.
Okay.
Yeah.
Funny.
And Dedham's right next door, so.
Yeah. Dedham is, yeah. I actually am working right now. I'm in the town of Westwood. So all of my mates that are in the other, they're at the library, but that's usually where we meet for our true crime every month.
At the library in
at the
Westwood?
library in Westwood, which is the next town over from Dedham.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I grew up in Newton.
Who did?
I did.
You did? Oh, I thought you grew up on the South Shore, like
I
Taunton.
did until I was 11, and then my mother got married again, which is pretty
Okay.
much where the book ends.
Okay,
Is when she got married again, but she got married and we moved to Newton, and I went through the Newton school system. And
oh, okay.
I have lived in Newton till about 15 minutes ago. We're in the middle of moving to Virginia, so.
Oh, very good,
Oh, wow.
very good. Newton's been in the news lately, hasn't it? Speaking of crime, who would have thought, right?
The fact that there hasn't been a murder there in what, 12 years,
Yep,
and we have 4 now.
4.
The fourth
And-
guy, right? He killed his
Yep.
wife.
he did. He with a baseball bat over the weekend.
Restraining order in place, right?
Yep,
Those are all
yep.
so effective.
Yep. Yep. So your grandfather was a colorful character, huh?
Totally. He was a Bostonian.
Was he?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
He had that South Shore thing going on, right?
well, South
He was
Shore,
from-
okay.
Yeah, he was from Brockton. He was born and raised in Brockton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was interesting the way you talk about him in the book.
Yeah, well, he was my only male figure. And I didn't realize till I grew up that was kind of abnormal. My father told a story about, and this was when I was really small, about my grandfather. He worked with my grandfather in a real estate office on the corner of 18 and 106 in Bridgewater.
Okay.
And he would send my father to the post office, and my father would open the post office box, and all these envelopes full of cash would come out. And my father was like, what the hell's going on? And he said he would put an ad in like the back of Yankee magazine. I'm paraphrasing now because this isn't exactly what happened, saying if you want to know the real Sermon on the Mount, send $5 to P.O. Box, blah, 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 Bridgewater, Mass. So he's a grifter.
Wow.
That's mail fraud, right?
Yeah, that's mail fraud. Yeah.
Fraud, yeah.
I have one question. Why didn't you tell me that story? So it's in the book.
I don't know.
I mean, this is
Well,
the
I
part
picked
I
up on
think
when I
that-
read the book, Jen, I picked up on the relationship with the grandfather. So I was like, interesting.
Yeah.
Frustrating for a writer to hear these incredible, and this isn't the only incredible story she's told me after we read the book.
Well, don't forget, Jen, we had all kinds of stories we had to pull out.
And that could be a quick paragraph.
Yeah, I know, but still,
All right, all right.
who knows why?
Our next-
I still got a bunch of Noonans out there. I got to be careful.
So just out of curiosity, how long from like beginning till the book was published? How long did that take?
15 years.
Oh, yeah, 15 years. And between Liza and me, once I came into it's like summer of 2018.
Yeah, I think so.
And the book, we sent the book to the publisher, we sent the manuscript to the publisher in 2020, and it was published in 21.
Wow.
Yeah,
And
I
that's-
enjoyed it very much. It was a great book.
thank
a
you.
lot of detail. I thought it was great. And this is my genre. I only read true crime. And I thought it was, yeah, I know. There's something probably wrong with me, but anyway, I thought it was
yeah.
very well
Oh,
written.
yeah.
Have you read Helltown? Have you read Helltown?
Paul read
No comment.
Helltown and he said it wasn't that great, so I didn't read it.
Good.
Yeah, I did not read it.
All right, I'm gonna go off. I'm gonna go off now.
Go off.
I liked your book so much. When I heard that was coming out, I got it right away and read it. And read all the way through, and I get to the end and I'm like, wait a second, the lady from the Dunes is involved in this case? And then when I read the author's notes at the end, that, well, I used literary license or whatever,
Good for
I
you.
got royally pissed off.
Good for
And
you.
I was like, if you told me that at the beginning, at least I could read the book knowing that. But I read the book and now I'm like, I don't know what was real and what wasn't.
I know.
And really, I mean, he stretched the definition of literary license
Yes, I would agree.
to fiction. I mean, we asked Edith Vonnegut if her father had any connection to Tony, if there were any letters, if there was anything, she said, no, nothing.
We
So
heard
he
she was very
created-
unhappy.
Yeah, he totally and yes, she's very unhappy. So Casey Sherman totally created relationships with Vonnegut and Mailer to sell his book and to sell his film.
Yeah, no, I can't tell you how mad I was when I
Good.
read the author,
Oh,
when I read the
you
author notes
can.
at the end. I literally slammed the book down and I was just,
And
I
then
can't-
after the book was published, the Lady of the Dunes case got solved.
solved.
Yeah,
Well, yeah,
yeah.
not solved, but identified. They identified who she was, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really, that threw me for a loop and it really soured me.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised to hear that.
I talked everybody else out of reading it, so.
Yeah, he
Both-
did. He said to me, don't read it. You'll be mad. Don't read it. So I didn't read it.
You got to go on Amazon and write that review.
Isn't that,
Casey,
Paul?
Yeah, I'm retiring Wednesday, so I can do it then.
Yeah,
you
there you go.
congratulations. Both Casey and I were, just as an aside, I don't know if you guys knew about this, but when the paperback of The Babysitter launched, Jen had a family emergency. So I went to Provincetown myself to the bookstore to launch the paperback. And it was a big deal. It was a big event. And we got systematically, Jen, you describe what happened.
Yeah, I mean, they got shut down.
Yeah, I saw that.
Both Casey and I.
Basically, the P-Town Mafia circled its wagons and threatened both the bookstore owner and Liza. And the bookstore owner said, I liability wise, I can no longer hold this event because if anything happens, then the victims can say you were warned. Why weren't we warned?
Yeah.
So they basically blacklisted, which is so ironic in a place like P-Town to have a book blacklisted. But that's what, as Liza said earlier, the Tony's family, who is still there, his ex-wife, his children, his grandchildren, and the P-Town Mafia just circle around them and consider them victims, and to a degree they are.
And they
Now
are,
they're
yeah.
making, but now they're turning their victimhood into a job, into a full-time gig.
Well, I think Ava sends her hitmen out into the world and then she sits quietly with her hands folded. But you can't underestimate the trauma that these people suffered. And we understand that. And
Yeah, but you lived it too. You lived it as well.
That's my point. That's
You lived it
exactly
as
my
well. It's not like you're telling a story that didn't happen. This is your story that you
Whether
lived.
she knows it or not. That's
Right.
right.
And
Exactly.
they refuse to accept that this happened to Liza. They called her a liar. They called her, a grave digger. They called her, grave robber. I mean, all of these horrific terms, money grubber.
Yeah.
And because they refuse to acknowledge that this happened to her and that she has a right to tell her story.
Mhm.
Because they feel like it's all their story, their husband, their father, their grandfather, and nobody else has a right to talk about it.
Yeah.
And it's just, I'm, sorry.
That's
No,
the trauma.
Killers are public figures, and public figures
right.
no
Exactly.
have no privacy. So,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's been a ride.
Mhm. Well, you did A+. You did a great job,
Thank
both
so
of you.
much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
very, very, very
Yeah.
well done. The
Great.
detail, all about the detail.
yep, it is.
Yeah. It was
When
very.
you're actually there, the detail comes easily, right?
Mm-hmm.
I
So
know.
what's the next book you ladies are working on?
We're both working on different books, very different books. I'm working on a memoir about my sister who suffered a traumatic brain injury last year,
Oh,
and she's literally come back from the dead.
wow.
And it's a story of just remarkable perseverance and strength. And there are no data on her type of injury and recovery because it just doesn't exist. 90-something% of people with her kind of injury die. And if they make it to the hospital, they don't make it out. And so she not only made it out, but she was skiing this year. She's biking, she's swimming, she's talking, yeah. So it's really a story. It's a book about our incredible bond and how through her perseverance and just this community of love that surrounded her, she came through it. I mean, she'll never be 100%, but I wanted to write it for the families because we weren't given any hope at all and asked if we wanted to pull the plug. And thank God we didn't. And I think there were no resources for us to go to say, okay, well, show us other patients that have survived this. And the doctors were like, we can't.
Wow, good for her.
Yeah.
I
That's
know.
awesome.
She was incredibly strong, though, physically fit, like you read about.
Yeah.
It saved her.
I mean, she
Mhm.
died. She died. Yes, she died. Then was revived mountain biking. So, yeah, 66 years old out on a mountain bike ride after a day of work. So,
Wow, amazing.
yeah.
Quite a story.
Yeah. What are you working on, Liza?
I am working on a little known story that's not much has been written about the first 3 enslaved men who crossed over Union lines at the beginning of the Civil War and unleashed a wave of self-emancipating slaves at Fort Monroe in Fort Monroe, Virginia.
Okay.
And the Union general who saw an opportunity created an unprecedented, called them contraband of war, and was able to keep them rather than send them back. And so I'm working with the descendants of those people and telling those family stories.
Oh,
It's
wow, that's great. Wow,
Yeah, it's exciting.
that is exciting. Wow.
There's a couple of
Very good.
non-true crime books I'm gonna have to read now.
Yeah, exactly.
I hope so, sir.
Yeah. Our little
Is that
Mary
why you're
Booth, we
moving-
all,
is that
we're
why
all
you're moving
alike.
to
What's that?
Is that why you're moving to Virginia?
No, it's a funny thing because I've had a fascination with Virginia for 25 years.
Oh, wow.
And then my son married a woman whose dad lives here, and we got friendly with him. And he lived in a place I had a fascination with. So that's where it started. And then I ended up writing this book. So we gave up and said, Uncle, we're going. So we did.
Things
Very
happen
good.
for a reason.
I think sometimes they do. We don't know what that reason is, but it's wonderful. We're pretty happy down here. So
Good. Very
Yeah.
good.
well, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a
Thanks for loving
delight.
our book. Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Good
Bravo,
listening,
ladies.
good
Bravo.
listening.
Thank you.
Great
Yeah,
job.
Good luck with the rest of your writing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
Bye
Thank you very
now.
much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for
You're so
taking the time.
welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Right.